Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series here on radio and podcast. I'm your host, Paul Vogelzang. And today we have a very special episode for all you baseball and film aficionados out there. We're joined once again by returning guest, Smithsonian Associate Noah Gittell, a distinguished film critic for the Washington City paper and a renowned author whose latest book, Baseball, the Movie, dives deep into the storied intersection of America's pastime and its cinematic portrayal. Noah Gittell will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. So please check out our show notes for more information about Smithsonian Associate Noah Gittell and his presentation titled Baseball in the Movies. But we have Noah today to share some insights from his extensive exploration of baseball films, including those well-loved classics and some truly fascinating but lesser-known gems that have flown under the radar. Baseball, the movie, isn't just about the sport, it's about the cultural phenomena and the symbol of the American dream that baseball represents. Noah watched an impressive roster of 82 baseball movies to craft this book. That's a lot of movies. Discovering stories that celebrate the underdog and illuminate the sport's impact both nationally and globally. Today, we'll learn about the films that go beyond the mainstream narratives, films that might not be household names, but have contributed uniquely to the tapestry of baseball cinema. From the portrayal of historical figures and fictional heroes to the exploration of cultural shifts that offer personal triumphs, these films reflect the diverse ways in which baseball mirrors life. Join us as we pitch some engaging questions to Noah, exploring the making of his book, his take on the future of baseball films, and why even in a sea of cinematic sports stories, baseball holds a special place in the heart of American culture. So, whether you are a die-hard fan of the sport, I am, a movie lover, yep, that's me too, or someone who cherishes rich stories and compelling discussions, this episode is for you. Let's step up to the plate with Noah Gittell on the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. Stay tuned. Noah Gittell, welcome back to the program.
Paul, thanks for having me.
Yep, always great to talk with you. Smithsonian Associate, of course, and we have talked previously about the Oscars, your work as a film critic. This new book, though, it really captured my attention quickly, and I've enjoyed it. Thanks for sharing with me. Of course, the title of the book is Baseball, the Movie by Noah Gittell with a foreword by John Sayles. I want to get into all of this. I think many of our audience will know you from our work as a, we've talked about the Oscars, as I mentioned previously, your work as a film critic. This book is fascinating because it's a book of films, and I wonder if you just tell us, is it a baseball book? Is it a book of films about baseball, and how does it kind of fit all together with your work as a film critic? I thought that was kind of a fascinating kind of confluence.
Well, I'm always interested in liminal spaces. I'm interested in putting two ideas together and kind of seeing what happens in the middle there, and that's what this book really is.
Yeah,
it's a book about baseball. It's a book about Hollywood history. It's a book about America. It's a book about our politics. Essentially, the idea is to look at the baseball movie as a work of art, but also as an American artifact. And we go back to the beginning of the genre, which I point to Pride of the Yankees in 1941 as sort of the beginning of the modern baseball film. And then we track its evolution over the years, all the way up to the present. And what's fascinating about that, and you can do this with any genre that's been around this long, really, is you can see how it has reflected changes in American culture. And what makes the baseball movie, I think, particularly useful for this sort of analysis is that baseball is the national pastime. It's the national game. So it it has this extra meaning as an American artifact. And that led to some really fascinating discoveries for me, seeing how the baseball movie was used as this sort of symbol of post-war optimism for many years, and then how in the 70s it became a little sadder, a little more sour, and they started ending with a loss instead of a win, and then how it continued to evolve and change over the years. So it was just sort of endlessly interesting to me, and as a lifelong fan of both baseball and movies, it was just an absolute pleasure to put together.
It was a pleasure to read. It really took me back to, you worked hard on this book. Congratulations on all of it. You watched, I think the number is 82 plus films. Amazing work. Congratulations on all the research. There are some, kind of movies that I was surprised about. I didn't really know. Maybe some movies that didn't quite get the attention perhaps that they deserved in terms of portrayal in baseball culture. What surprised you the most in kind of the research that you did among all of these films that you watched?
Well, it is interesting to see which films endure, which films don't, even if they were popular at the time, and then which films were maybe a little bit ahead of their time. And the two films that come to mind for me in that regard are Little Big League and Sugar. Now, Little Big League is a kid's baseball film, sort of. It came out in 1994 about a 12-year-old child who becomes the owner and then the manager of the Minnesota Twins. And it was an outlandish premise, and it came out at a rough time because we were really at the end of the baseball movie boom here, and I think people were getting a little tired of it. And the movie it wasn't a hit and it went away, but it was really considered a special movie by burgeoning sabermetricians. These were like young people who were very interested in advanced analytics in baseball. They were very interested in changing the unwritten rules of the game and really trying to do things more logically in the game instead of relying on old canards like the closer can only come in the ninth inning, or you should always bunt when there's a runner on first. And the young kid in Little Big League, he uses a lot of this kind of sabermetric thinking before it was mainstream, before it was popularized. And some people speculate that that's part of the reason the movie wasn't a hit, was that it actually challenged people too much in terms of the conventional wisdom of baseball. And so I think it plays much better today than it did then. And Sugar is an interesting case because this was an independent film about a Dominican-born player who is signed by a major league team, comes to the U.S. and tries to work his way up through the minor league system without speaking the language, without knowing anything about the culture. And this film came out in 2009. It was appreciated by critics, I think, but it was not a hit, and it sort of disappeared. But as we learn more about the struggles of Dominican players, the corruption that goes on in the Dominican Republic in terms of signing players at young ages and that sort of thing, and then just the struggles of minor league players in general. I mean, they have unionized in the last couple of years. A lot of awareness has been raised about how little they're paid and how poor nutrition they get and this sort of thing. I think Sugar has taken on added relevance in the last couple of years as opposed to when it came out, even though that was only 10, 12 years ago.
Great stuff. The chapters for our audience, again, the title of the wonderful book by Noah Gittell is Baseball the Movie. The chapters are divided by films. They're grouped together. As I say, 82 plus films that you watched in doing this. How did you kind of group the films together into their chapters, which are all really wonderfully, there's a Watergate baseball section. Really neat the way you've kind of divided up the table of content.
Well, thanks. The first question was, what are the sections and what films are going to get their own chapter? Or in some cases, I have grouped a couple of films into a single chapter. And the goal here was not just to catalog the best baseball movies. That would be a different book, and to my mind, a less interesting book. My goal was to tell the evolving story of America from 1941 to the present through these sections. And this was probably the most creative part of putting the book together, was figuring out what those sections were, what those eras were, when they began, when they ended, and how the films fit into those eras. So it wasn't always super intuitive, and there was some guesswork involved and hoping that I could make all the pieces fit. But in the end, I think they did, and I hope viewers will appreciate some of the creative leaps of putting certain films, juxtaposing certain films together and putting them in certain sections. To me, it's fun if there are little leaps of imagination in there to try to make some pieces fit, and I hope the readers feel the same way.
Yeah, I did. I really thought that it was just this really amazing kind of connection that you were making with time and subject and then the American dream, which is really very much a part of all of these films. How did that kind of come together? Maybe give us a couple of examples that you researched that really showed this aspect of baseball and the American dream, because that's a big one.
Yeah, it's funny because I think especially in the post-war era, when you're dealing with Pride of the Yankees and the Stratton story and the Babe Ruth story and the original Angels in the outfield, these films, and really, to me, it's an intrinsic part of baseball as a whole, our fandom of the game. There's this sense that, any one of us who loves this game, if we got a shot, if somebody gave us a shot to play with a major league team, maybe we could do it. I think that's in the back of all of our minds, that like, put us on a mound, give us a bat, and we could hang with them for a little while. And there's something about that is very American, I think. The sense that if you give us the opportunity, we can make the most of it. And a lot of these films play on that. I mean, so many of those early films that I just mentioned open with a player kind of being discovered out of the blue. As Monty Stratton, played by Jimmy Stewart in the Stratton story. He's just playing in his hometown, after work or on the weekends, and he gets discovered by a scout and brought to a tryout, and he makes a major league team. And of course, then there are ups and downs to their careers. In many of these films, they are stricken with a disease or some other kind of affliction, and they have to overcome it. But they all rest on this idea that they are sort of an everyman and that baseball is an everyman's game. And, in the post-war era, when America had kind of taken this role as the great defender of democracy in the world, I think baseball was used as sort of a symbol of that democratic ideal, that it is a game that anyone can play and that anyone can succeed at.
Hi, it's Paul. Do you love entertaining, informative, eclectic, insightful programs about culture, health, science, life, and everything Smithsonian? As part of our Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast, we're introducing you to the new Smithsonian Associates streaming series. Smithsonian, a nonprofit organization, is excited to present this new aspect of their 55 years as the world's largest museum-based educational program. Join us from the comfort of your home as we periodically interview Smithsonian Associate guest speakers. Our audience here on radio and podcast can explore our website for more information, links, and details at notold-better.com. Thanks, everybody. Our guest is Smithsonian Associate Noah Gittell. Noah Gittell has written this wonderful book, Baseball, the Movie. I just so enjoyed it. The book is getting high praise, and it's really interesting how you've brought together both Hollywood and baseball. And as I say, John Sayles has written the foreword. Maybe you'll tell us a little bit about that. But Ron Darling gives this great recommendation. Of course, the wonderful Mets pitcher with just an amazing career in baseball. But Ron Darling says, there's analysis and there's storytelling. In my professional life, I practice them both in the booth all season long. Noah Gittell not only masters each skill in Baseball the Movie, but intertwines them seamlessly with humor, depth, and a personal perspective that makes it a must-read for any movie lover, baseball fan, or curious observer of American culture. Just, again, congratulations on this fantastic book, on getting Ron Darling and John Sayles. Really interesting kind of perspectives. How did the John Sayles forward? I always wonder how forwards come together. I get the impression that was an interesting one to pull off.
Well, I'll tell you, Paul, I've been freelancing for 10, 12 years now, so I know how to hustle. I know how to get an interview. I know how to get someone's phone number. And I'll tell you how it happened with John. I'll let you behind the curtain.
Yeah.
I reached out to him through his agent, which I was able to get that information on IMD Pro, which is a thing you can subscribe to. And I just told him I wanted to interview him for the book. And initially that was all it was going to be. And I did interview him for the book over Zoom. We spent about an hour talking. And it turns out he's one of these guys, one of these older guys that when you get him talking about baseball, it's just hard to get him to stop. He wanted to tell me about all these old players with funny nicknames who I had never heard of, and he just loves telling these stories. So we had a great talk, and then I saw that he was going to be introducing a screening of 8 Men Out at Yale University, which is about 45 minutes from where I live, and he lives in Connecticut as well. So I figured I'd go down there and say hello to him in person. I thought that would be a good idea, and I did, and we had a nice conversation, and that was enough. I shot him an email a couple of days later and asked him to write the foreword, and he was willing to do it, and I was so grateful because he's a great baseball man and he's a great filmmaker, and he made one great baseball movie in 8 Men Out. Yeah. And in terms of Ron Darling, I spoke with Ron a couple times. I wrote a piece for the New York Times a couple years ago about the Mets telecast and all of the cinematic techniques that the director was bringing into it. And Ron was nice enough to provide a couple supporting quotes for that. And then last year I went into the booth for the New York Post website and I interviewed Ron and Keith Hernandez and Gary Cohen, the whole Mets telecast team. And Ron he's such a smart guy. He was one of my favorite players when I was a kid. Yeah. I was a big fan of that 1986 Mets team. But he's so smart. He went to Yale himself, actually. There's another Yale connection. And he's written 2 books, and he's so erudite, and yet he knows the game so well. In fact, when I asked him for a blurb for the book, he said, "I'd love to do it. I'm a little busy right now because I'm writing a play and I'm helping my son with a poem. So I need you to give me a little time." So this guy he lives writing. I mean, he's a writer, and he gave a really great quote, and that meant quite a lot to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a wonderful quote. It's a wonderful book. Again, congratulations on being the hustler to get all this stuff done because it's fantastic. Really, really good stuff. Yeah, I've always liked Ron Darling too. And you write about Richard Linklater in the book a little bit as well. Another icon. I watched the movie inning by inning with Augie Garrido. There's just a lot of smart people in baseball. And Augie Garrido was one of those. But what was it that changed maybe over various decades of kind of the social landscape in baseball and film? Because it was very much an evolving kind of period. You know, we talk about some of these latter stars and, you know, Ron Darling being one of those, Augie Garrido, just this amazing coach. What did you see that changed in terms of just kind of the evolving nature of the cultural aspect of these films in baseball?
I think it just the baseball film became more self-aware and more critical. As I mentioned, a lot of those early baseball films, they're baseball's always been a nostalgic game, right? Like even from the very beginning, they were playing it in cities, they were playing it in New York and in Hoboken, and yet it was being pitched as this pastoral everyman game, even though it was only played by, quote unquote gentlemen. So that's always been baked into it, this idea that baseball reminds us of our past, reminds us of America's past, reminds us of our childhood. And I think for a long time, baseball movies were willing to just embrace that and paint this sort of, varnished view of America, of humanity, not really willing to delve into the underlying issues of racism and corruption and all that stuff. And then over time that changed because America lost its innocence. I mean, if it happened during the nuclear age or during Vietnam or, during the Iraq War, whenever you want to say that it happened for you, I think it's happened several times. Watergate for sure. And I think that the baseball movies have reflected that. So in the 70s, we see a Negro Leagues movie for the first time in Bingo Long and the Traveling All-Stars and Motor King. We see Bang the Drum Slowly which is an interesting parallel to Pride of the Yankees because they're both about New York baseball players who get a disease and die, except in Pride of the Yankees, it's very triumphant because this was right on the verge of World War II, and it was supposed to be a rousing kind of dignified death. And in Bang the Drum Slowly, it was sad and it was dour, and there was really no hope to be wrested from it. And then when you get into sort of the 2000s and the Obama era, you see them really willing to look at race and gender and all this stuff in a much more incisive way, I think. So really over time, it has mirrored the broader cultural patterns of the country. And that's what makes it so fascinating, and why, to me, the book is far more than a baseball book or a movie book. It's really, in some ways, it's a political book, or at the very least, a history book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in one of the final sections, it's titled "The Expansion Area." You write about faith-based baseball films, and that brings us forward quite a bit, because there are a fair number of movies that have been considered some of these faith-based films, very Christian in orientation. An interesting niche. I did not know about that particular niche in film. How did you come across that? Because that was a real eye-opener for me.
I came across it when I looked online for like a really basic list of all the baseball movies that have ever been made. It was very early in the process. And I saw all these films from like 2009 to the present that I had never heard of. And then I started researching each one of them, and I was like, oh, these are made by, faith-based evangelical production companies. And I did know that the faith-based film in general was this sort of trend over the last 15 years. It really started with The Passion of the Christ, when people saw that there was an audience for this sort of thing. And then all the studios started these little smaller arms of where they would produce these films at low budgets. But the baseball film was a really good fit for it, because, it is this wholesome, nostalgic view of America that maybe wasn't as popular in the mainstream, but was very popular among this segment of the population. And every once in a while, one of them does break through. There was a film, I believe last year, called The Hill, with Dennis Quaid, about a young boy who had a disability who got to the minor leagues. And it was, in movie theaters. I think it played like 1,000 theaters last summer, and it was a faith-based film. So that's sort of a mainstream version of it. But most of the films I cover in the book, in this last chapter, were not really playing in many movie theaters. They were direct to a Christian streaming service called PureFlix, or direct to DVD or Blu-ray, where they'd be sold in like bins at Walmart and that sort of thing. And, most people probably never heard of them, but for this segment of the population, the baseball movie is still thriving.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was really amazing. Thank you for that. What is it about some films that just endear us immediately to them? They become they become film classics about baseball, and others are unsung and even obscure. What did you find about that trend? What really sparks our interest about a film and about baseball?
I don't know. It's a tough one, Paul, because I think on some level, it's like any other kind of movie. A movie is good or it isn't good. And a lot of people ask me, what is a baseball movie? And it's really hard to define, because kind of any rule that you can come up with to determine what is and is not a baseball film, there's always an exception to it. Mm-hmm. So I used to say, well, a baseball film is a film in which the baseball drives the action and moves the plot forward. But then Field of Dreams isn't a baseball film, because there's like barely any actual baseball in it. And yet, of course, it's a baseball film, because they spend pretty much the entire movie talking about baseball. And I don't know that there's another movie that is more imbued with the spirit and the history of baseball than that one. So it's very hard to define. But I do think, I think a baseball movie that is successful really has to understand the game in a fundamental way. You can't have a novice's understanding of baseball and expect to make a good baseball movie. So whether it's like, Bull Durham, which was written and directed by somebody who played in the minor leagues, and you can certainly feel that running through it, or something like Moneyball, which, I detail this in the book. Players hate Moneyball. Baseball players despise that movie because they think it devalues them and gives more credence to the front office. But the people who wrote that book and wrote that movie clearly did their work and did their research to understand that particular facet of the game, and it shows. So I think there has to be a love of the game and a knowledge of the game to make a baseball movie really endure. And we certainly have many, many examples of that happening.
I always loved Moneyball. I like the kind of the metrics part of it. I would go to games with my dad. We lived in San Francisco, and we went to the old Seal Stadium to see the kind of the New York Giants who moved to West, and I kind of could keep track of the game by keeping score. And so I love those metrics. And I want to talk to you about one of kind of the top films, and you've mentioned it, Pride of the Yankees. And you brought up this kind of novice's understanding of the game. There were actors who were in the Pride of the Yankees who had kind of a novice understanding of the game. And maybe talk a little bit about that, because I thought that was kind of an interesting touch about these actors who really didn't know something about baseball. And that is going on today. Both my boys didn't play baseball at all. And here was an actor in a wonderful film, Pride of the Yankees, who didn't really understand it.
Yeah, well, the difference between your boys and Gary Cooper, who is the actor in question,
big difference,
is that your boys at least have, well, a number of things perhaps.
But
the biggest thing for the purposes of this discussion is that your boys have probably seen baseball played on television a lot, or at least they had the option to. In 1941, there was something like 5,000 televisions in America at the time. So most of the baseball people had seen was either in person or on a newsreel or something like that, or maybe in a film. There were some baseball films before Pride of the Yankees. So there wasn't this same expectation of authenticity that we now have from sports films.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, like Gary Cooper did not need to be perfect as Lou Gehrig. Whereas today, I think that would be expected. On the other hand, he knew nothing. I mean, he really knew nothing. He was raised in England for part of his childhood. He sort of missed the boat on baseball. And they hired a former player to teach him how to play the game and look credible. And in fact, they used that as a selling point. When they were making the movie, there were all kinds of articles written about his progress. And would he be able to make it look realistic or would he not? And that was a big storyline leading up to the release of the film. In the end, he barely managed to do it. And they had to invent a lot of visual grammar in order to kind of, smooth over some of the rough edges. For example, we see it in baseball films all the time now. A close-up of somebody swinging. You don't exactly see them hit the ball, but you hear the sound of the ball being hit, and then you see it going off somewhere into the field from a different angle. That was visual grammar that was basically invented for Pride of the Yankees, and it's been used in every other film since.
As I say, Noah Gittell, I can't recommend this book enough to our audience. Baseball, the movie by Noah Gittell. Upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates. We could talk for a long time, but go see Noah Gittell at Smithsonian Associates talking about Field of Dreams, A League of Their Own, all of these wonderful movies, including Pride of the Yankees and everything else. It's been such a pleasure to connect with you again on this topic. What do you see as the future with baseball movies? We talked a little bit about faith-based films. Is that where it's just going to center, or are we going to just get faith-based baseball films out? Yeah, tell us.
I don't think so, because I think that will remain sort of niche, or at least in its own lane. We are if you take out the faith-based baseball films, which are not really mainstream, we are in a fallow period for the baseball film. There hasn't been one with any sort of wide release since Everybody Wants Some, which came out in 2016, 8 years ago. And, if you want a baseball film that was a hit, you have to go back to 42, which was 11 years ago. So it's been a long time, despite the fact that other sports movies are actually doing quite well right now, whether they're boxing movies or racing movies, or there's been a bunch of basketball movies recently. And I think part of the reason for that is there's this idea that baseball doesn't travel, that it doesn't do well overseas. And especially in the last 15 or 20 years, the overseas box office has been really important to Hollywood's, overall calculations of the film's bottom line. But my hope is that that's changing, because baseball is getting more international. Last year, they had the World Baseball Classic in March, which was enormously popular. I believe the title game had better ratings than any World Series game in history. So I think it is starting to grow all over the country. And my hope is that could lead to a resurgence in the baseball film, or at least a renewed confidence from Hollywood executives that a baseball movie could have a chance. And in fact, I'd love to see a baseball movie set at the World Baseball Classic, because I think there were all kinds of incredible storylines there. There were, aging veterans who sort of were trying to hang on and get one more shot. Maybe they looked at it as a tryout for the major leagues. There were young guys who were minor leaguers playing for their home country. Some of them were playing for Israel. There were some playing for Italy who were getting their shot against like real superstars. There were guys who were hoping to be managers in the major leagues, getting their first shot at managing one of these world teams. And there's just so many intersecting storylines, heroes and goats and redemption. I think it would make a great setting for a baseball film, and it would be a great way to sort of launch the baseball movie into its next phase.
Well, Noah Gittell, it is always such a pleasure for me to talk with you. And go hear Noah at Smithsonian Associates, where you just have a wonderful time with all of this baseball talk. So thanks, Noah. Have a great rest of your day. And again, congratulations on this wonderful book.
Oh, thanks so much, Paul, and thanks for the time today.
My thanks to Noah Gittell. Noah Gittell will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Noah Gittell has been a previous guest on the program. He is a Smithsonian Associate. Please check out our show notes today for more information about Smithsonian Associate Noah Gittell and his presentation titled Baseball in the Movies. My thanks to the Smithsonian team for all they do to support the show. My thanks to you, our wonderful audience here on radio and podcast. Please be well, be safe. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. I'm Paul Vogelzang, and we will see you next week.